Well, I was born in the Midlands, Birmingham. We moved to Leicester. From there, I went to the Royal Academy of Music. I did my 3 years at the Royal Academy, and then Barbara Holly invited me into the orchestra. That's where I spent 15 years. Well, farming is in my background on my mother's side. And as a kid, I used to go over weekends. At the age of 14 or 15, I was milking something like 40 cows by myself. We hunted down here for a large house, plenty of outbuildings, and sufficient land. My wife, I should think, nearly had a heart attack when I first brought her down here. The roof needed re-roofing. The house literally had to be gutted. All the rooms were plastered. I did the plastering. Joan would knock it off beforehand. And we gradually worked through the house, moving from one room to the next. Well, we read the odd books on buying cattle. One of the main things stressed in books was that don't go to a market. You don't know what you're buying. So what we did, we approached a neighbouring farmer and we bought our first Jersey cow. And we brought it home, another neighbour carted it here for us. And that evening we sat under the cow and we tried to milk it. The farmer never told me sometimes the cows don't drop milk first time. After about an hour we gave it up as a bad job. I was quite prepared to phone the farmer and say he can have his cow back. But following morning we went down there, eager, milked it by hand, and the milk just poured out. We don't feed the cows anything that will taint the milk. We feed the cows in winter on hay, and in the summer, of course, they're grazing. And we give them a handful of nuts, just to keep them happy. Otherwise, we try to keep the feeding as simple as possible. What we want with our cattle is a cow that doesn't give too much milk. We're not interested in a milk of low quality. We want a milk of high quality. Therefore, if our cows will average 4, 4.5, 5 gallons, we're satisfied. I'm not interested in the cows giving 8 or 9 gallons. We're going to turn our own milk into cheese. We started making cheese in a bucket. And we used to make it in the kitchen. And we used to put the milk in the bucket. And we used to cut the curd in the bucket. And at the end of the morning, we had one cheese, a little cheese. Eventually, after a few weeks, we bought a 5-gallon tub, stainless steel thing. We were making 2 cheeses a week, really big time then. And then eventually we wanted cheese presses and the equipment. We're obsessed with cheese. We're now making about 36 to 40 cheeses a week. 2 years' time, we hope to be doubling that output. We took in guests after a couple of years, and we ploughed our money back into the farm. And we've built up slowly and steadily. It would be nice to think that Llangloffan cheese would be still here in another 200 or 300 years' time. And my great-great-grandchildren would be still making. But there again, I've got 2 daughters that's both learning musical instruments. They both play the piano. One's a violin and one's a cello. So perhaps in another 20 years they'll be giving recitals and making cheese in the daytime. We'll see. We used to farm our own cows, and about 6 years ago we made a decision to buy the milk in. We only get the milk from one farm. We need the same farm every day because that farm we get used to is milk. Now the amount of cows that we need for this amount of milk, 850 litres of milk, is about 35 to 40 cows. That's a lot of cows to milk twice a day and make the cheese. So we decided we're going to concentrate on the cheese, and we've got some very good suppliers in Pembrokeshire. They supply beautiful milk. The first thing we do in the morning is to pump the milk into the cheese vat. We pumped 850 litres of milk, and the milk is evening and morning milk. The milk is also unpasteurized. We don't heat treat the milk.
So the milk comes into here. We then have to warm the milk up. Now to do that, we circulate water in the jacket of the vat through a heater on the wall. So at about 4:30 this morning, the vat comes on, the heater comes on, heats the water in the jacket, so by 5:45 we can put the milk in. And the object really of the exercise in the morning is to get the milk warm as quickly as possible. So by 7:30, we can put the first ingredient into the milk, which we call a starter. It's a culture of live bacteria. And it's best described as soured milk, and that is it. I've saved a little bit of it this morning because this milk, this sour milk culture, is going to make our starter culture for tomorrow. So later on this morning, I'm going to put this into a bucket of heat-treated milk. We're going to incubate the bucket for 18 hours, so tomorrow I've got 8.5 litres of sour milk. We then pour it into the milk when the milk in here is about 24, 26 degrees centigrade, long as it's around that temperature. And once we've added the culture to the milk, we then wait for all the milk in here to become slightly sour. Now somebody asked the other day, where do you get the original culture from? Well, we buy our cultures from a farm in Somerset. They make thousands of tons of cheese. They have a laboratory, they have a microbiologist, and they keep the starters going. These are the best starters you can use. They're the traditional starter. Not many cheesemakers use them, and certainly the big factories don't use them. They are problem starters. They can cause us big problems. So what we do, we buy so many strains of this bacteria, and then we rotate different strains. On a Saturday, we take one of these out of the freezer. They arrive here frozen, so you can actually freeze the bacteria. We then thaw it out, incubate it for 24 hours, and on Sunday we inject the bacteria from this bottle into a sealed bucket. And in here we've got a rubber bung. I don't know if you can see it, but we've got a rubber bung in there, and we literally inject the bacteria into some heat-treated milk. We incubate that bucket for 18 hours, and then we've got our starter for Monday. And then for the rest of the week, we subculture. Now, depending on the size of your enterprise, depends on how long you can run these. This week, we're running to our favourite starter. It's got a number, MT33. This one produces really good cheese. But it's a problem starter. If the hygiene's bad, this bacteria lets you know about it. And what happens if the hygiene is bad and there's a build-up of bacteria, eventually it attacks the bacteria in the vat and stops any acidity production. It's quite a science making cheese. Now, as soon as we've added the bacteria, we then wait for all the milk in here to become slightly sour. So depending on what cheese you make, depends on how long you wait for the milk to go sour. So here's the clue coming up. At 25 to 9 this morning, the milk in here had slightly soured. There's a problem though. You can't taste it, you can't smell it, and you can't tell by looking at it. So how do we know? We take some milk out and we do a chemical test using that equipment over there.
First of all, we'll take 10 millimetres of whey. And we add 3 drops of phenolphthalein. And then we're going to titrate with sodium hydroxide. When the whey starts to turn pink, you can measure off the scale. Yeah, just turn slightly pink. And we have an acidity of 0.13 lactic acid.
So this is the clue. When the acidity is up to the right acidity level for Llangloffan cheese, not for Caerphilly or Cheddar or Cheshire, but for Llangloffan, by which time we're up to our rennet in temperature for Llangloffan cheese, we then put the rennet in. And that's very exciting, because the amount of rennet we put in this morning was very little. So what really has happened from 7:30 to 25 to 9, the bacteria has been reacting with the sugar in the milk, the lactose, and producing acid. And when the acidity level's right for our cheese, we put the rennet in. And the rennet is the enzyme that clots the milk. So we did that at 25 to 9. And the amount of rennet we put in this morning was very little. We only put something like 170 millilitres, nothing. We pour it into the milk, and in about 10 or 12 minutes, the whole of the milk is set into a curd. And once we've got a curd, we leave it until the curd becomes firmer, and then we cut the curd with these knives. Now the question is, how do we know when to cut the curd? Well, we've got a little knife that we can put into the curd. We lift the knife up, and when the curd splits nice and cleanly, we cut the curd. Some cheesemakers, they just wet the back of the hand, put the hand on the curd, lift it up, and if there's no milk on the back of the hand, they cut. So every little cheesemaker's got their own various little ways. And it's the actual cutting of the curd that releases the liquid which is trapped in the curd, which is called whey. Now, as the curd knives are slowly rotating around the vat, the curd is gradually getting smaller. We've put this plate on here, which really basically replaces my arm. In the old days, they used to stir the whole of this by hand. But now, in this modern world, with stainless steel, we can incorporate the knives and the stirrer all in one. We can actually be a lot more careful. We can control these knives from the control box. And this is done quite simply. We can go slightly faster if need be, and we can go slightly slower if we're going too fast. The slower we go, the more gentle with the curd, the less fat will release from within the curd. We're slowly cutting, as you see. When I can see that the curd is more or less a uniform size, about the size of these little pieces of curd. Let's see if I can get one out. When we get the curd slightly smaller than this big one here, by which time the curd will be a little firmer, we're going to turn the knives around and let them just stir the curds on the blunt side of the knife here. So this is the blunt side and this is the sharp side. Then we've got curds and whey. So all we've been doing over the last 50 minutes or 55 minutes is stirring the curds in the whey. Now shortly now I need to know if the curd is dry enough, if we've got enough whey out of the curd for the cheese. I need to go in by hand. And then we'll make a decision whether to let this curd go to the bottom of that or continue to stir a bit longer. So to do that, I'll just simply go down, have a feel of the curd. There's the curd. That's going to be the cheese. And when the curd feels dry enough, we'll let it go to the bottom, wait for the curd to become slightly more acid, and then we're going to drain the whey off. And then you'll come back here and see what it looks like when the whey is drained off. It's very exciting. It's a highlight of the morning. When we go to bed at night, we can't wait for 11:15. Any questions up to now?
Is it just a single species of bacteria that you use?
We use a lactic acid producing bacteria, which is called Streptococci, lactus and cremorus. Now yogurt uses another bacteria, bacillus. Now the bacteria we use, even though we use Streptococci, lactus and cremorus, there are many strains of that. There are many strains of E. coli. There are many strains of listeria. Some listeria is harmful, some isn't. Some bacteria is good, some bacteria is bad. The lactic acid producing bacteria we put in there, we have to, we can't make the cheese without it. And the original bacteria, basically all it is sour milk. In the old days, when they didn't know anything about bacteria, they would leave the evening milk in the cheese vat, wait for that milk to become slightly sour overnight so the milk would be kept warm. In the morning they put the morning milk in, then they add the rennet and make the cheese. But things have developed over the ages. And you know, cheese making started in the year 2000 BC. And the Egyptians discovered rennet. Rennet, the original cheese rennet, is an enzyme from the lining of a calf's fourth stomach. The lining, which is called the vel, in that lining is this enzyme called renin, and renin curdles milk. Any more questions? Any more questions?
When you say you can get problems with the starter culture,
Yes.
can you explain what are these problems?
If you use the same strain of bacteria day in and day out for weeks on end, the whole of this building will collect that strain. It'll be in the air. And eventually it builds up and it creates a virus. And then the virus attacks its own bacteria. And it stops any more acidity production throughout the cheese make. So we trick the bacteria. We rotate different strains of that bacteria. So at the end of the week, we go into another strain. This one that we're using now, we won't use for another 5 weeks. So we give it the factories, Dairy Crest, all the big factories now that used to make thousands of tons of cheese, they used to do a cheese make in the morning, a cheese make in the afternoon, and another one through the night. 3 shifts in a day. And they were finding they were having so many breakdowns, they stopped using these starters. They use a different type of starter now, which is what is known as phage resistant. Any other questions?
How important is the temperature?
Pardon?
How important is the temperature?
Well, it's quite important. You can start making one cheese in the morning and end up with another if you get your temperatures and your acidities wrong. Somebody the other day, we get some funny people here sometimes. Somebody said the other day, does it ever go wrong? I said, well, if it goes wrong, we just change the name of the cheese. We call it cheddar. So there's the curd. And the whey is going to be drained off. The whey will be collected by a neighbour for his pigs. The pigs drink it. When we used to keep pigs, we used to soak rolled barley in the whey, and the next morning it was like a porridge. And the pigs loved it. They really loved it. In some countries, Holland, Belgium, Germany, the whey is bottled. They put an additive in and they bottle it. I think this is it. It's lovely, isn't it? So I've made the decision. We're going to let the curd go to the bottom of the vat. We're going to take all these knives off now and prepare for the draining of the whey. Shortly we're going to put a mesh in front of the curd and push the curd up the vat. So now we push that down the side of the vat, push it right down to the bottom and slowly press it up. I know you can't see this, but what we've got in now is the curd sitting at the bottom of the vat. The milk level was there. We drained something like 90% of the milk off. 86% of milk, approximately, is water. So as a cheesemaker, all we're doing is getting the water out of the milk. This is the exciting bit now, because we've literally got a problem. It's a problem in the cheesemaking process. The curd is sitting at the bottom of the vat. It's bonding together. In doing so, we're going to have to cut the curd into blocks. We're going to do that using that knife. We're going to make one block of curd in the middle. Then we're going to turn the blocks, and we're going to keep breaking these blocks every 20 minutes. And the more we keep the curd open over the next hour and a quarter, the more crumbly the texture of the cheese. So if you're making a cheddar, you wouldn't do this part of the process like we're doing. So it's just worth bearing in mind now that all the British hard cheeses go through the same stages that we go through. So it doesn't matter if it's a cheddar, a Caerphilly, a Wensleydale, whatever. We all go through the same stages. The stages are slightly different. So Llangloffan has its own recipe. Cheshire has a recipe. Wensleydale, cheddar, Red Leicester, whatever. Good. So we'll go. I'll hold some of this curd up to show you exactly the problem, and you'll see the problem. This is the problem. The curd is bonding together, and in doing so, look at all that whey that is escaping. That whey is trapped between the curd. There's another look. There's another one. So now we're about ready to cut this into blocks. That's what we're doing. We're turning the blocks of curd. Good. Right. Completed. That's the hardest job in the morning. This is another indication that everything is going well. Vaughan is now going to take a sample of whey and is going to check the acidity. So we're monitoring this throughout the morning. We're watching the acidity develop. If the acidity doesn't go up, cheese is finished. No cheese, hard cheese. We get a lot of suggestions at this time of the morning from a lot of people throughout the season, telling us a better way of doing this. The problem we've got now, in this block of curd, is a lot of whey trapped between the particles of curd. Now to get it out, we've cut it up into blocks. And then we're going to keep breaking the blocks, and every time we handle this, more whey will be able to escape. But the suggestions that we often get are, why don't you start pressing it now? Well, if we did, we'd press all the fat out. And this is what we'd start pressing out. That is the fat, the cream. So it is possible, actually, to put all this whey through a cream separator, get the whey cream and make whey butter. We did once. We put 100 gallons of whey through a cream separator. We got the cream, put it in a butter churn, made 2 ounces of butter. We didn't do it again. So there. So basically, the art of the cheesemaker is to keep the cream in the milk. So we'll keep breaking it. Then eventually, in about an hour and a quarter's time, about 12:15, we're going to put all this curd through that gadget over there, which is called a curd mill. We're going to add salt. We've already measured the salt out. We're going to put all that salt in it. About 2%. The salt is there for preserving and also for taste, and it also checks the acidity. It stops the acidity going up so wild. Because the interesting thing about this cheese making, as soon as we've drained the whey off, the acidity starts to develop very fast. Throughout the morning, if we were to draw a graph and what has happened when we added the bacteria to the milk, the bacteria reacts with the sugar, the lactose produces acid, and that continues throughout the whole morning. So if we're to draw a graph, we'll be going up like that. As soon as we drain the whey off, up like that. Eventually we'll be able to smell this. At about 12:15, when we're ready to mill the curd, we'll smell quite an acid smell. Right, now just look, just keep an eye on the tap now, because I'm just going to move the curd. It's been sitting there, for 5 minutes, that's all. I'm going to move the curd now. You watch the whey that is released already from that curd. Now look at the whey shooting out. You see what I mean about the bacteria, how it can push this whey out? So here we go, the first break. Now we're going to break the curd in half and pile the curd at the end of the vat. And this is how we do it. Whoa. Right, question time. Any questions?
How did you become a cheesemaker? What made you start to do it?
It's a good question. How did I become a cheesemaker? I bought a cheese kit. A cow, a book and a bucket. Does that answer your question? And that's how we started 27 years ago. We started making cheese in our farm kitchen. The first cheese I ever made was in that bucket. So if it went wrong, only 2 gallons of milk. Well, 3 gallons. Just under 3 gallons this bucket holds. And to heat the milk up, we put it in a bowl. And the bowl is here. We put the water in the bowl because you can't apply direct heat to milk. Burns. So we put the milk in there, the water in there, sorry. And then we put the bucket of milk in and we slowly raise the temperature of the milk till we got to rennet temperature. This does it all automatic. And we made our first cheese and we ate our first cheese. and we made our first cheese from our own cows. About 5 or 6 years ago, we started making more cheese. This is a 1,000-litre vat. But at the end of the day, I still think small is beautiful. So we've tried to keep this operation on a small basis, a personal basis, because it's our little baby, this cheese. And we get a lot of satisfaction from producing a real cheese. It's something that's beneficial to our health. I don't know if you realise, but there's a lot of bad stories going around about unpasteurized milk. A lot of stories going about listeria and all these. There's nothing wrong with unpasteurized milk. It's been a stable part of our diet for centuries. And when you look at food poisoning cases in the dairy part, dairy foods, it's under 1% a year. Chicken, 35% a year. You know, so it's very low risk. And then you get the problem with unpasteurized milk, unpasteurized cheeses, about listeria. You've all heard of problems with listeria. And the original statement that came out from the Minister of Health in the listeria scare a few years ago, he gave a statement. And the statement was that pregnant women and old people whose immune systems that are not well should keep off soft cheeses, pate, freshly prepared salads from the supermarket. Didn't mention unpasteurized, pasteurized. Didn't mention it. But now it's got distorted somehow. So a lot of people are actually in confusion. I've eaten unpasteurized milk and drank it, unpasteurized milk, all my life. I eat unpasteurized cheeses. It's not done me any harm. But I know for sure I've got a good immune system because we have to work 7 days a week here. We start in the spring. We only make cheese here when the cows eat grass. That's the best food for the cows. It makes the best cheese. So you start to see I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So we get the best milk and we make the best cheese. When the cows go on to silage in the autumn, we stop making cheese. So we do all our production in 7 or 8 months. I eat the cheese. It's got to be really good. And I am fussy, I tell you. I am fussy.
Full of bacteria, aren't you?
Oh yeah, I'm riddled with bacteria. Riddled with it. And even in the morning, if there's any of this sour milk culture left, I drink it. And the reason I drink it, because I read a story about all these people that live over 100 in Russia. There is a community in that part of the world where the majority of the population, they live till over their 100, and they wondered why. And it's because they're drinking unpasteurized milk and they're eating cottage cheeses. Now, this is a demonstration now to show you how to make a cottage cheese. This sour milk culture was, the whole of the milk was like that to the top. But you see, I've left it there for a couple of days to show you what happens to sour milk if it's left in the heat. Eventually, the whey comes out by itself. That's a cottage cheese. When I was a kid, if the milk went sour, my mother didn't throw it away. She waited for it to form into a curd. Then she poured the curd into some muslin, hung it up over a bucket. The whey would come out by itself. When the whey stopped dripping, you got cottage cheese. She used to open up the cloth, and you could see that the cloth on the cheese, it left the imprint on the cheese. She used to then put it in a bowl, mix some salt with it, mix it up, grab her hands, make it into a little ball and put it on the salad. It was delicious. It was delicious. But I mention that now to a school party of 15 or 16 and they go, ooh. All they want is a McDonald's. Anyway, so any more questions now? Because the next stage, what I'm going to talk about now, I'm going to talk about the maturing of the cheese. So let's get it straight now. This curd is going to go through that mill at approximately 12:15. And anybody here will call back and you'll be able to see the milling. We mix the salt in, so Vaughan will stand that side and put the curd in. I will throw the salt in. We will then put it into these moulds here. Now the moulds this morning, all the cloths have been boiled. We can't use a disinfectant, anything like that on it. So we wash them and then we boil them, then we rinse them because we don't want any byproducts on the cheese of sterilizers, etc. The moulds have been cleaned in water that we can't put our hands in. Once we've got the curd in, we shall take these cheeses into the pressing room and we start pressing the curd tomorrow, not today. There's the salt. This is what we're going to put in. The salt, we're going to mix all this with the curd now. And then mix it all up and then put it in the moulds, and then we're finished. And then we're going to sterilise the room ready for tomorrow. Here we go. Do now is put the curd to one side. So this is what we've got, all the curds nice and small, look. Now we can get it in the moulds. There they are. So today we're making our plain cheese. We make a red cheese. We make a red cheese with chives and garlic. When we make a chive cheese, we add the chives and garlic at the same time when we mill the curd. And to make a blue cheese, we put penicillium roqueforte in the milk. Then make the cheese as normal. Another one. Right, let's talk about the pressing. So the pressing room we're going to go through in a minute. They're all cast iron presses. They're all over 100 years old. And the amount of pressure that we're going to put on these big cheeses is near a ton of pressure. And the smaller ones, about half a ton. On the third day, Wednesday, the cheese goes into the cheese store to mature.
These are the cheeses we made yesterday. The only pressure they've had is one cheese on top of another. They've been left to cool, and now they're going to have their first pressing. First of all, we have to knock them out. Then remove the cloths. We then wash the cloths, wash the moulds, and get ready for putting them in the press. Nice clean cloths. And we put them in upside down to even the pressure out. And you will only have very light pressure to start with. This is a follower. We'll go on one of them. And a wooden follower, and then onto the press.
Now it's time to see what the cheese looks like on the third day. This is the follower. It pushes the cheese down when the cheese is in the press. Then we made another little follower because we go for perfection at Llangloffan, and this is to make sure that we have less waste around the cheese. Now I'm going to knock the cheese out, and with a bit of luck, it'll come out in one go. There she is. Oh. Now let's have a look, see what she's like. And look at the lovely finish on the cheese. And the cloth leaves an imprint. It looks as if it's been pressed in some old-fashioned muslin. And then we do this to get a few of the imperfections off the cheese. Because when it's sitting on a wooden shelf, these little bits are likely to be damaged. So to make sure there's no damage, we take them off. There we go. Can you see these little bits sticking up here? We're going to take them off. Lovely. And now we're going to put the cheese on the shelf in the cheese store, and it'll sit on a wooden shelf there, and in about 8 or 9 weeks this cheese will be ready to eat, and we would be then a mild cheese. Right, so there you are. I'm going to talk about the cheeses in the maturing room. Not a lot to say, really. The cheeses come out on the 3rd day. They go into the cheese store, and they then sit on wooden shelves. And the cheeses are turned regularly. And the reason we turn the cheese is to keep the moisture consistent in the cheese. After 2 or 3 days, the outside of the cheese goes hard. It dries. That's the rind. Or the skin. You call it what you like. But it's the skin that protects the cheese. Now, the longer we keep the cheese, the more mature it gets. If you want a really strong, mature cheese, you keep it longer. We keep cheeses up to 18 months here. And we sell young cheeses perhaps 8 or 9 weeks old. Somebody said the other day, because we do get some funny people here sometimes. Somebody said the other day, can you tell by looking at a cheese if it's mild? Do you think you can? No. Well, you can. You see, the mild cheeses are the young cheeses. The mild cheeses, when you go in there, will stand out like a sore thumb. The young cheeses, the skins on them, very smooth. They're very young looking, very attractive. And as the cheese ages, the skins change. They become sort of wrinkled and pitted. And I'm not drawing any comparisons either. Well, you force me then. I'll draw one comparison. The older the cheese, the sharper it gets.
Okay, these are the blue cheeses which have been in the presses for 24 hours. They're now going to need spiking to let air in so that the mould can grow. And just go around. All the way around. Okay, so now all we do is cover the cheese, and hopefully within 5-6 weeks it will start to bloom. The purpose of the cover is to keep the humidity high, and also we use ozone in here, and it would stop the mould growth. So that stops both of those, and it'll be left here for 5 to 6 weeks undercover, being turned every day until we think it's ready, and it will be cored, tested and available in the shops.
What about marketing, Bill?
We don't have any problem with marketing. We never have done, because we're making a real cheese. It's sought after. There are shops and delicatessens that specialise in selling top quality foods. This is a real cheese, so no problems. And you know, 27 years ago when we started, there was no distribution that we have today. There were no city links, parcel lines and all this. So what we made here, we basically had to sell it here. So right from the beginning, we introduced a farm shop. We sell 70% of our own cheese here, and the other 30% goes to wholesalers, retailers, and we sell on the internet as well. See, the whole world's changed. I can, from this little village, this little hamlet in Pembrokeshire now, I can market my cheese throughout the world. This year we've sent cheese to Iraq, Sweden, France. If you go on my internet site, you will see links to other shops in the United States. There's one in New York that does our cheese on mail order, just like we do it here for the Europe and whatever.
But the competition is quite fierce,
In cheese making?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's more people gone into cheese making. But I was fortunate, you see, because I was there first. in Wales. There was nobody making cheese in Wales when I started. And I was first to go on the internet in Wales. And my website is called welshcheese.co.uk. Not Llangloffan because nobody can spell it. So I had the initiative to use something that people can remember, Welsh cheese.
How many varieties?
We make 5. Plain cheese with chives and garlic, a blue cheese, and the farmhouse cheese, when we mature it for a year, we change the name to Granston. That's how we do it. Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed your company. It's time for you to go now because we want to clean up. And we use a hose pipe. So have a nice afternoon and have a nice day. And there is cheese to taste up in the shop. All right? Thank you very much. Well, at one time it would just be the farmer's wife that made the cheese by herself. We're not as strong as the old farmer's wives, it needs 2 of us now.